Hi folks, Matt Snape here from TAFE New South Wales. Just a quick little video on how to do rectangular arrays in the AutoCAD 2020 software. Previous versions of software have been very similar to this, going right back to about 2014, 2015. I'm not aware of any pending updates with the latest version 2021. So what we're going to be doing is looking at how to create a rectangular pattern or a rectangular array, kind of like this shape that we see on the screen here next to me now. Traditionally we would have created this shape probably using the copy command. So without the array, that would probably be the most likely way of doing it. But using the array command means that we can space objects out evenly on an essentially rectangular grid, only having to create the one and making the spacings and number of items fully editable. So let's see how we do that now. If we have a look at this existing one, you'll see here that we've got dimensions on the object itself, offsets also from the corner of this boundary, and this would be the first object that we draw. We've then got distances from that object to the next and then subsequent ones, and so this is enough information for us to start creating an array or rectangular pattern. We'll also need to know how many rows there are, in this case 5, and how many columns there are, in this case 3. So if we move over to this other example that I've started here, let's assume that we've gotten to the point where we've created the first object in the correct location and in the correct size. What we now want to do is create an array or a rectangular pattern of that particular object or objects. So the first thing to do is to make sure that you select all the objects that you want to create an array of. So in this case we've got both a square and also some diagonal lines. They're on different layers, that doesn't matter. We select everything that we want to create the array pattern out of in the first instance. Then we'll activate the array command. Go up to the modify tab and you'll see here the array command. There's a little drop down arrow which takes you to path and polar arrays. We're going to cover polar arrays in another video later on. So activate the rectangular array command and you'll see that it completely changes the ribbon at the top of the screen. What it's done is it's brought in this new tab called Array Creation, and this is where you can place your settings which enable you to specify the array patterns and spacings. So the first thing that we can do in the latest versions of AutoCAD is we can use these different grab points to get the array to roughly what we want it to be. So that's very handy, particularly when you're not sure what dimensions you want to use, but you want a pattern or an array to fill an area. So if I just grab that, I can move that around, as you can see, and I'll just move that around until I've got my 5 rows and 3 columns, and then left click on the screen to drop it again. The other thing I can do as well is just change the number of rows by using the arrow or the number of columns, and I can also use this arrow on the inside to change the spacing in between the objects. So I'll get it to roughly where I want it, just so that I know that I've got things in proportion. It also means that if I do a miscalculation at some point, it's going to be much more obvious that I've made an error in calculation or something. So now that we've done that, we need to set out our spacings. Now, if we go back to our original drawing here, we can see that the distance or space between our 2 rows is 15 millimeters, and the space between the objects in between the 2 columns is 15 millimeters, and in between the 2 rows is 20 millimeters. But those numbers 15 and 20 are not the numbers we need. The distance between, when you're dealing with AutoCAD arrays, is actually the distance from one point on the original object to the same point on the next object. So it's not just the gap between, but it's from one point, whatever point it is, it doesn't matter where, on the first object, to the same point on the second object. So in this case, our columns, our vertical columns, are going to be separated by 15 plus 15. So our distance between columns is going to be 30. When it comes to rows, we've got from, say, this point here up to the same point on the next object, 15 plus 20. So our space between, or our distance between rows, is going to be 35. So 30 between columns, 35 between rows. Let's just go back over to our new example, and you'll see if we go up to the ribbon, you'll see that we've specified the number of columns, which if you want to, you can also change here. All right, but we want to keep it at 3, obviously. Okay, and then we need to specify the distance between. So distance between columns was 30. You can see here that my rough fill of the area, by dragging the array out to fill about the right amount of space, puts it at a value that's close to 30. So that's a little reassurance that the maths that I've just done is correct. So we'll put the 30 value in there. Okay, and often what you'll have to do is click on another cell inside the array creation ribbon and then move the cursor down onto the screen before the array will actually update. If I then move over to rows, number of rows 5, that's correct number that I want, and the space between again is very close to the number that I actually want. Okay, it's 35. So that means I should be happy that I've gotten that right. So we click into another, come back onto the screen, and that has updated that distance. So now that I've done that, I have one final choice to make before I close this array. The button here, Associative, all right, allows us to keep the array as a single array object. The benefit to that is that if you decide that you need to change your spacings or number of rows or number of columns at a later date, you can do so. If you unselect that and close the array, each of the objects will just remain as single individual objects. Now, I would normally choose to keep an array associative because we can use the explode button to break an array down into its standard pieces anyway. So if I close the array now, you'll see that the ribbon goes back to the home ribbon, and also that array creation tab has disappeared. All right. If I go back over to the left hand side of the screen here, as I come into each object, you'll see each one selects as individual objects. That's because we created that pattern using the copy command. If I come back over here to our array pattern, you can see that when I go put the cursor over any object, it previews that it's going to select the entire thing. And if we do click on the entire thing and select it, you'll see that our array edit ribbon comes back up. So we can go in here and we can change the values if we wish to. So the distance between the columns can be made greater. We could even change the number of rows if we wanted to, and even change the number of columns. Okay, so we can edit the array very easily. Now, if you wanted to edit the array so that there was just, you could remove a single occurrence of that, there is a way of doing that within the array command, but it is fairly cumbersome. What most people that were trained in the older versions of the software like myself would tend to do would be to close the array, select it, this time go back to the home ribbon so we can go to the modify palette and select the explode modify button. That then explodes this so that each object that makes up the array is now back to being a separate distinctive object, so we can just select the ones we don't want and hit delete. Of course, as soon as you explode the array, you lose the capability of editing those numbers of rows, numbers of columns, and the spacings between each of them. So that's a little bit about rectangular arrays. I certainly hope that that helps you. Review this video as many times as you like, and of course do any exercises that you can. Make sure you practice this very useful AutoCAD tool.